Hey everyone, I'm Gracie, and welcome back to the Gracie Military Child podcast. The world should know how unique military children are. We may look like normal children on the outside, but we go through some pretty extraordinary circumstances that shape us to the leaders we are today. I am super excited to continue on with our No Greater Sacrifice series, sharing the stories of military children whose loved ones were critically wounded or fallen in action. I hope you find inspiration from these scholars that just because a traumatic situation may happen, you are still able to achieve your hopes and dreams. So, hi, Ashley. Welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me, Gracie.
Yes, of course. I'm super excited. So tell me a little bit about your parent who served and a little about their service.
Yeah. So my dad, Randy Nance, he joined the military right after September 11th. So I was going to school in Dallas because that's where all of our family was. And he picked me up because we were all being evacuated from school since it was near an airport. And I will never forget, we're getting in the car and he was just telling me like he was going to join the military. And my heart as a daughter was a little bit nervous about that after seeing everything that had happened on September 11th, the day of. And so I remember going home and just being like, what's going on? And our family just totally rallying. And yeah, my dad, he's incredible. He was a sergeant first class. He joined at 33, which the military cutoff is 35, like when you can join. And so he came into it late, but he came into it so motivated and inspired to serve his country. And growing up, I've just learned so much about his like willingness to serve and his willingness to sacrifice. And all of those components have really taught me and made me so much of who I am today.
Yeah. I think it's special that, you know, every military story is different. And for you guys, it was September 11th happened and then your dad felt called to serve, like right after that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was literally like 2 weeks. I just remember that being such like a whirlwind and a storm of like hearing it and then it happening, him starting training, getting used to my dad being in training away, getting used to like the sweet reunions. Reunions are the best when they come home. Yeah, I know it is really cool to hear how everybody's military stories start.
Yeah. What was it like kind of, because obviously you were old enough to remember, you know, the day your dad, you know, joined the military. What was it kind of like being an older child and not being born into it?
It's a good question. Wow, that's a question that I've never even been asked or thought of. So I love that, Gracie. I would say, I don't know, like first grade is still so formative. So you're still very much like getting your bearings with life. Luckily, it came like still so early on that I do feel like that was like the most shaping part of growing up. I would say the weirdest part, but I don't even know if my brain comprehended this at the young age, but the weirdest part would probably have been like shifting from a routine of like being near family. That's our extended family. But I would say I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to like get to watch my dad step into it. I think that there was a gift and an honor and a privilege too, and just like getting to see his choice of choosing to serve the military and his bravery. Yeah, I think that getting to be on the front end of it as a first grader, watching it happen was a really big gift. Because had I been born into it, it would have been a big gift too. But I'm really glad that the way that it did happen, it allowed me to see the steps of diligence that it took. And also, I know for our family, my dad joining the military was like a huge gift to our family too. And just the way that my dad really did like have a new lease like on life, like when he joined. And yeah, I feel like while there was like a lot of service and a lot of sacrifice, there was a lot of beautiful things that were gained in military life too. So yeah, it was. My brother and I have completely different experiences, which is wild.
Yeah,
Imagining like being from the same family and growing up so differently. I think it's
exactly.
probably so true of so many military families. But he's 5 years younger than me. So he was just 1 year. He was only a year old when my dad was joining the military. So it's wild to see how our lives have been from the same family, but so different.
Yeah, and I noticed that even I have a sister who's 15 months younger than me.
Okay.
So we're kind of closer in age where we, walked through the same experiences together for the most part.
Right.
But I had her on the podcast quite earlier on, and hearing the different experiences from her and from me, I was like, I literally said, I remember this a little differently. This is how I remember it. So like
Wow.
even that tiny bit of an age gap between us, it
Hmm.
still kind of changes the entire game and how she remembers it versus how I remember it.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense. It is wild, even in that short window.
Yeah,
But also, it makes sense because with military lifestyles, things are rapidly moving always.
they are.
And so, yeah, I guess too, like that's also a gift. Did you really, I feel like growing up in a military family, like realize early on, like the gift of time and the gift of life and how to make the moments count. Like, just because you're in a place for not very long. Like I remember when we would get stationed to different bases. Just I think that growing up as a kid is really interesting because we're all made for connection, and then you have like these consistent times where you're like putting roots down and then you're leaving. And so like learning that balance of investing fully, like without holding back. I think this is older Ashley processing, obviously. But investing fully while also having so many moments where you're like, I won't be here forever. So I think that, yeah, there are a lot of gifts of that I feel like have helped me like later in life of really maximizing the moment.
Yeah, and it takes a lot out of a military kid to move, start to put roots down, start to even unpack boxes and find friends. And
Yeah.
then, 2 years later, or however, even months later, you get orders that you're moving again and you have to do it all over again.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's wild.
Yeah. How many times did you move?
Growing up between first through seventh grade, I attended 13 different schools. So we lived so we were born in Texas. So we then moved to Georgia. That was our first station. And then North Carolina, then Tennessee. And then my dad's injury happened. So then we were back in Texas and then we were back in Tennessee. And then at that point we came to Florida, but all in all of those like 7 moves, I attended 13 schools. And so it was a lot of making new friends on the fly pretty quickly, a lot of leaving at times, not after
Yeah.
too long. And yeah, it definitely, I feel like as a kid, I was really grateful for the way my parents really framed the situations well for my brother and I. And even still, like with their good framing, there were still moments that I definitely, as a kid, could notice like, okay, like my walls are a little bit more up because it obviously is painful to leave and to start
Right.
again. And as I've unpacked that, like as I've gotten older, because I remember college was like my first choice of like, okay, this is the first move that I get to choose. As a military kid, it's so weird and beautiful, but it's interesting because a lot of us have been moved all over. And so your idea of like geographical home isn't really a thing. And also, I feel like for young people, our culture very much is like, go move.
Right.
And so having the lack of geographical, like stable root of this is where I'm from, this is where I live. And then also having a culture that's like, go and do, like, you're young, explore,
Yeah.
adventure, along with my already naturally adventurous self. I just remember that first move being like, I get to choose wherever I want to go. And
Yeah.
so it's just funny. It's funny how all of those things collectively like become threads of who you are and how you make decisions and all of that.
Yeah. And, with the military, you don't get to choose really where you move. You can kind of have a say depending, um, but you really don't have a choice. The military tells you. And so when you have that choice on your own to say, I want to go here,
Yeah.
it changes the game.
Yeah. It was sweet.
So you mentioned your dad's injury. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes. So my dad was injured in Iraq in 2006. And yeah, it was really interesting. So growing up, like when my dad was deployed, it's just so sweet. Like my heart just loved my dad so much. I'm such a daddy's girl. And so it was when he would leave, I would just like remember like funny times of pouting,
Yeah,
or
that
of
was
being
me.
like, yeah. And it's so funny looking back because obviously like that had to happen.
Yeah.
And my poor mom, like, who is also my best friend, I wasn't being very fair to her. Like,
Yes.
it's just like the funniness of childhood and navigating and figuring out these things that seem so foreign. But as a kid, I think that for me, I would definitely I feel like most probably have had times of worrying about their parent. I don't know if that's true across the board, but there were definitely those moments. And I was in sixth grade in 2006 when he was injured. And my mom and I were driving. I think my dad had just sent her a CD, and so we were listening to the CD that he had sent her, or like the recommendation. I don't remember exactly how it all was happening, but I just remember like feeling this like very like just sick feeling like in myself of just like worrying about my dad. I just feel off. Like I hope that he's okay. Like wonder like how his day is, like wonder what's happening. And at that time it was awesome because we were still getting to communicate here and there, and those times were so treasured. But my mom got a call like later that evening, and she didn't tell my brother or I. I knew something was off. Josh was pretty young, so I don't know like what his memories were of that time. He was old enough to probably remember and grasp, but um yeah, I didn't press on it too much. And then a few days later, she told me that my dad had been injured in Iraq. And yeah, and it was really interesting because he was injured like through a roadside bomb. And so I mean, she was being told that he would never walk again. And I'm not sure if at that time, like, we knew that he was burnt or not, but hearing about third-degree burns, and yeah, it was really interesting. And so all of this too is lining up around Christmas. His injury was December 22nd. And so in that, I think by the time my mom told my brother and I think it might have been, I mean, it could have been the day after, it could have been Christmas Eve. I don't know. But I just know that we got on a flight like the day after Christmas to go meet him at BAMC, the #1 burn clinic.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother and I think we're too young to go into the ICU. And so, as a kid, hearing that my father was injured and hearing these things, and my mom is really good about not really disclosing a ton of information to my brother and I in that department. She's very protective. And so, but even still, like being at the hospital or being around Brooke Army Medical Center, anyone who's been around knows that you see people who are really resilient, who are really brave, who have walked through war and who have effects from war. And so you're seeing all of these scenarios. And I just remember like seeing a ton of people who their faces were completely different because of burns
Mm-hmm.
and all of these things. And as a sixth grader, really being thankful for their service, really being scared too of like, oh, I have no idea like what my dad looks like. I have no idea
Yeah.
of like what his reality is. Will I recognize him? Will I not? Like, just like those different questions. And his injuries were waist down. So he had a lot of nerve damage to his left foot. And he had to get an amputation and that. And then he had third-degree burns on both of his legs. But I remember seeing my dad and like seeing that his face was still intact, which is not everyone's story. But just being like, yeah, I just remember that first time that I got to see him. It was before he had gone into a surgery, I want to say. And it was a very brief moment, but it was such like a relieving moment of just being like, okay, like he's okay. And again, a young brain, like I don't know like why like the brain made that distinction of if it's this way, oh my goodness, if it's this way, he's okay, and
Right.
looking back, that's really not fair to think that way. But that was just the process that my brain was like undergoing at a young age. And so, yeah, so getting to see him was really great. And then getting to see him on his journey, which was definitely a journey, as everyone's story is post injury, has been really wild. He's had a ton of complications with burned skin and amputation. And so has had to have many like revisions to that. But it's been really cool, like in recent years, like as he has gotten to be able to be mobile, which he always has since the injury, really hasn't let anything stop him. But it's cool to shift into a difference of his body actually following him too. And it's not something that he's constantly having to be in surgery over or constantly having to be concerned about. There still are those moments, but it's been really cool in the last few years to see him get to be as active as he enjoys to be. And yeah, it's been awesome.
Yeah. And it is, I mean, like you said, it's a journey from, that starts the day they get injured and it just carries on for the rest of their lives and it impacts the rest of the family because, you have to be more available to
Mm-hmm.
do like the little things or, um, you have to be like, I mean, my dad would say that me and my sister were his reason. Like we
Mm-hmm.
stayed in the Fisher house when we were at BMC, and he'd hear us getting ready and getting up in the one room, and he'd be like, "Okay, they're getting up. Like I need to get up too. Like I need to be there
Right.
for my girls." So there's just so many little things that play into it that they have to keep going, but at one point you're their motivation. So you have to keep going and, little things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It's cool the way that family works that way,
It
like
is.
how it really is a team. Yeah. I have always been so grateful for my dad and his example in all of this. Because it really does. I mean, it takes special people who can go and serve and sacrifice and come back to a completely different world in their own body, and yeah, having to relearn how to do so many different things and step into new things. And yeah, I mean, I just know that my dad really did walk that out and carry that out in a way that he didn't accept pity. He wasn't looking for that. He really just like walked in strength in that time of this is what's happened and how do we move forward. And I think if I can just accept part of that lesson, I'll be so well off because of watching him and so many other amazing men and women who have sacrificed and come back. Is truly it's pivotal. It really is.
And if I'm remembering correctly, I was so young when I was at BMC, but the burn unit was on the 4th floor, right? If you remember too.
I don't remember. That's a great memory that you potentially have on that one. I'm not completely sure.
Okay, so what I'm remembering is it was on the 4th floor, and my dad, who edits this, will probably be like, you're either so wrong or you're so right.
I know, it could be such a proud moment.
Exactly. Because my dad was on 4 West, which is where a lot of like the traumatic like amputees or injuries, that's where they go. Again, I could be wrong too, but that's what I'm remembering. But I think the burn unit was right across the hall. And so my dad, he was in 4 West for a while. That's where he was, but he did spend some time in the burn unit as well, as the years went on. But if you were like in the burn unit, you'd have like the burn unit right there, and then you'd have 4 West right there, where you'd see like a lot of those traumatic injuries come through. And so it's a different world seeing, these burned guys walk out, and then these guys who are traumatically injured walk out.
Right.
And it's like a completely different world around you. I mean, even if I'm wrong, like I think I'm right, but I don't know. But just walking around BAMC, most of these guys, especially during that time frame when you were there, a lot of these guys were traumatically injured.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I know. It really is and was a different world. And like I've mentioned to you, Gracie, I'm not really around a ton of military people or military children. So I honestly don't really like reflect or recall back to this time terribly often. So like even thinking about it now, it's like it is wild and it's a gift to be thinking about it now because it's just a gift to remember. But it really was wild because I mean, nowhere like would you ever see like people who do have traumatic injuries or incredible burns, and then the magnitude that we saw, how many people had incredible burns or how many people had traumatic injuries. It was wild. And on the flip side of that, wild's not the right word. I'm not sure what the right word is, but on the flip side of it too, the Intrepid Center, like I don't know if you remember that.
We were there all the time.
Yeah. And just getting to see again, like, I don't know, people like stand or people walk or people, I think they had like this awesome like water tool. And my brain, I don't know if I'm remembering it all correctly either. But yeah, just like to see like, I don't know, I feel like BAMC is so unique.
Yeah.
And I feel like also the experience to be in a place like FAMC is so unique. I feel like it's an experience that a lot of people have, but like when we look at the magnitude of the US, like it's not a life experience that many people will have. And so I think that it really was wild. Again, not the right word, but just thinking about how you do get to see like moments from the inception of someone's injury sometimes into the moments of people like getting to come back from their injuries. And I think that too is like such a gift, and everybody processes that differently, as it should be processed differently.
Right.
But I think that to be at a young age or to be at an old age, I don't feel like whatever age you're there matters, because I really do think that it does really rewire you, to be grateful, to be thankful, to also mourn with those who mourn, and then to be joyful with those who like are getting to celebrate. Because in a setting like that, I do feel like it holds so much of the tension of celebration and also disappointment. And I feel like getting to navigate those like among all of the people that are there is too like a gift of that season, learning how to walk in that.
Yeah, I think being in that area, it takes, the child lenses off where you're just focused like around yourself and around your own world. And I mean, it changes depending on how old you are. I was 9 when we were in BMC, so I was still
Yeah.
very focused on myself for the most part. But it takes those glasses off and it's like, no, there's this whole world around you where your little problem is really not a problem. Like you're
Right.
just making it into this big, big idea, and like push that to the side and realize like, there are other people out there actually suffering, and actually,
Right.
it takes that child brain away. And even at a young age where you're forced to mature at a faster rate.
Right. Absolutely. That is so true. So true.
Did you go to school on Fort Sam Houston?
I did. I did. Yes, I was there. I'm trying to remember the timeline of being there. It felt like, so I moved. It couldn't have been that long. It's so funny how some things feel like a long time. And then as
Yes.
you like get into your brain, you're like, wait a second.
It wasn't a
that
long time.
Again, military lifestyle. It's just, who knows? But
Yes.
yeah, so we moved there in December. Basically when we got the call, when my mom got the call, and when we went the day after Christmas, we just picked up our, I guess, clothes. We left our house in Tennessee.
Right.
And we really didn't do anything to prepare for a physical move at that point, but we definitely took clothes. We enrolled in school. I was there from, I guess, December to, I know that I was back in Tennessee for that following 7th grade beginning, right before we moved to Tampa, which is where we landed. But so maybe I just finished that 6th grade year there.
Yeah.
I feel like as a military child with these days, there's a lot of things that maybe I haven't actively sat with or like intentionally tried to remember. So that's a little foggy, but I do remember definitely being there for the second part of that school year. And I remember like being on the track team. So I got involved. My parents got me involved. It was always our thing. Like, when I was talking earlier about like having the gift of like seeing him on like the diligence and the beauty of just getting to watch his military career and the start of it and the choice of all of that. Because every man and woman who chooses to serve, they're choosing to sacrifice too.
Right.
And so like that's something that I've learned too is like the injury or the lives that we lose in war. Like it's a choice that they bravely made, like when they signed the papers, and it wasn't something that they took lightly. And so I just know that even with the sacrifice, you know, I don't know. I just feel like even with the sacrifice, there was a lot of willingness to sacrifice. And so in that, getting to grow up with my dad, like joining the military and being 33 and needing to push himself extra hard so that he could be among the best and prove himself at an older age for the military, we would go on a lot of runs, and I would just like be his running buddy. He would obviously have to go ahead sometimes, but we would just like run on the track, or we would run in the neighborhoods. But running was mine and my dad's thing. Like I just loved it with him. And yeah, and so at Fort Sam Houston, I just remember getting to continue my love for running with him. Not with him, but I got to continue my love for running. And I remember it being so significant, like when he was able to come to my races in that season. And yeah, it was wild. So yeah, I was at Fort Sam Houston.
Yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned running. My dad and I never really ran together in Ohio. And then they told him he'd never be able to run again, which,
Wow.
you know, he ended up proving wrong. And his physical
Hallelujah.
therapist, they set the goal of when he graduated from physical therapy, his graduation point was running the Army 10 miler.
Wow.
So I just remember there was one summer where him and I think it was like Tuesday and Thursday or like every other day or something, we'd get up at 6:00 in the morning and we'd go meet his physical therapist. And there were a couple other guys out there and we'd just run. And so that was like the two of our thing. We'd just get up and we'd go and we'd run. And she
I
would
love
train
that.
my dad. Him and I ran the Color Me Rad. That was my first
That's
5K I
awesome.
did.
Cute.
And I was his first 5K after injury. And then we just
Wow.
did so many races. My mom and my sister would walk the races with us.
That's cool.
But like it just became a thing that him and I always did. We always ran together.
I love that.
Now, of course, you can't really run in Florida because it's so hot here. But
It's so hot.
people think I'm crazy when I say Florida's hotter than Texas, but it kind of
I
is.
know. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely depending on the time of day. Yeah, for
Yes.
sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dry heat versus humidity is so different.
I know. I'm like on the fence. I'm figuring Florida out again because I've been gone for so long.
Yeah.
But the nice thing about Florida is the breeze. So I'm trying to figure
Yes.
out if it's the dry heat or if it's the breeze that's worse. And like I guess the humidity. But because sometimes it's like better and it's helpful. And then sometimes you're like, okay, this is truly terrible. But in Kentucky, and you know this because you were in Ohio.
Yes.
There have been times this past summer that I've walked outside and I've been like, oh man, I feel like I really just stepped into a sauna. And so yeah, I'm not sure which one's worse yet. I haven't decided.
It takes a little bit of adjusting. And that's again a military thing. You have to adjust to the different climates everywhere you go.
Absolutely. Yes.
So how did you get involved with No Greater Sacrifice and what has that journey been?
Yeah, No Greater Sacrifice was such a huge gift to my life in so many ways. So I hated the academic part of school my entire life. I think that this probably isn't typical across the board. There's probably so many different sides of this, but for me, I just really struggled in all of the moves because with every move that you have, the school's on a different curriculum. And so And so I think that because of that, there was a little bit of a challenge to be engaged sometimes, like, because I think that there was the frustration aspect of it of, I'm pretty competitive. My brain, I don't think was corresponding all of this at a young age, but now I can look back and I'm like, I'm a pretty competitive person. And I like to feel like I've mastered what I've done. I'm a hard worker. And so when you have all of these gaps of information and somehow you're still supposed to excel on the test that you really haven't been prepared for, um, or even know how to prepare for them because you don't know what you missed, then it's a big challenge. So I remember starting at second grade, I really hated school. And honestly, that really stuck with me, unfortunately, until high school graduation. Like there was really never a big turnaround of loving the academic side. I worked hard, I did my best, but I definitely never loved it. And so Rebecca, who's with No Greater Sacrifice, my mom connected the two of us. And Rebecca was just asking me questions about college. I knew I wanted to go. I think I wanted to go. I knew that it was like the next step of what you do. I was really grateful for like the gift of education and didn't want to waste that. And I think that's like one of the few things that like kept me rooted in hard work in school, even with the hatred of it, was I just couldn't, and I think military perspective probably played a role in this, but I just knew there were so many kids around the world who didn't have access to an education. And so to have the gift of education was really important to me, even though I hated it. And so Rebecca came in and she just, she's what my heart needed. She was just gently, unassumingly, and without like, I don't want to say without expectation, but without, I don't know, she just wasn't pinning me down to anything. She was just asking like, hey, what do you think about this? And honestly, I think that Rebecca was a huge reason that I ended up submitting applications for college. I don't remember the exact things that were going on in my brain at the time of doing that. I'd taken a gap year because I had been pretty sick my senior year. And so I just remember there being this like weird window where I was definitely applying as everyone applies in the normal time frame, but I wanted to go out of state. And so with my sickness, that wasn't something that our family thought that was the best idea. And so, which I totally agreed. And so there was just like this like weird window of navigating college decisions and what that would look like. But I remember her, and whatever circumstances were going on, Rebecca was definitely such a huge branch of support, I would say. Like I just picture like myself, and I just picture like a comforting and also a very much like, you got this, just go for it. Like hand on the back of just going for it. And so No Greater Sacrifice has been a huge gift educationally, because going into college, one of the things that was also important to me was to go in debt free, just because I do desire to live a missional life. And I really wanted to be free of monetary debt that would hold me back from being as missional as what I seek to be. And again, I think that a big part of that is through military lifestyle, just that upbringing of service and all of that. But so No Greater Sacrifice was huge in making a way for it to be possible to continue to live a missional life that is not hindered by finances and the realm of college debt, which I'm so grateful for. And but I would say like Rebecca's life presence in my life has just been such a huge gift in getting to navigate life as like a college student, and I was a first generation college student. So all of the support of No Greater Sacrifice and the support of what was made possible through Rebecca has definitely been shaping, and it has definitely put me on a path that I'm so grateful for. I attended University of Kentucky, graduated with communication, concentrated in social work, minored in psych and digital media and design. I came into college hating school, and then I graduated loving school. And it was just such a big turnaround, like in my own life and in my own heart, towards something that I never expected to have a different experience with. But in college, I really got to have the gift of loving school. And yeah, and also like debunking like the myth or like the lie that I had believed, well, do I just not like learning? And I really did get to see, no, I love to learn. And so No Greater Sacrifice and Rebecca have made an impact not only on the educational side of things, but also on the personal side of things, of how like I navigate like the world for the rest of my life. And yeah, I just really can't say enough good things. And then the aspect of being paired with other families and students who have gone through similar things, like any of the events that I've gotten to attend, have always been a gift to just partner with people who have come from similar experiences. And yeah, it's just deeply rooting and deeply humbling. It's awesome.
Yeah. I think that I grew up loving school, and I still love school. My
love that,
family
Gracie.
calls me a nerd because I just love school so much.
That's amazing.
But I think like in your situation where you're saying you grew up hating school because of like the moves to different curriculum, like that is so justified because it's hard. Like, you know, even kindergarten and first grade, what you did have was along the same lines. And then you had to move, and then you had to move again and again and again. And then, 13 schools later, you're like, I'm totally lost. Like,
right.
I don't know what I just learned in these last 13 different schools. Like, it was all so different. And then once you get to college, it's actually what you want to learn. And it's like the same thing. You have different classes, of course, like any other school. But you have that freedom to grow to love it more. And I think you're kind of forced to even love it more because this is kind of, what you are doing, and you're choosing to do it. And if you don't love it, then you can choose something else as well.
Right. Yeah, true. For sure. Yeah. And just like the consistency, like, I think that the consistency was a huge aspect of it. But yeah, also I agree with you, like in what you're saying, because with college, it's like you're choosing a goal. Like,
right,
your graduation is like going to be your outcome goal of what you've worked towards. Like, everything that you're doing leads to that point. And so I think that totally makes sense in a lot of ways for how someone could come from hating it to loving it. But I really do think that, I don't know. I just do wonder, like, I'm sure that I still would have gone, to college and all of that. But I do think that my experience without No Greater Sacrifice and without Rebecca would be incredibly different. And who knows, if I like would have made it all the way through. Like, I just know that the support that the organization gave me definitely did push me forward, and it definitely got me in the door too. So it got me in the door, and it walked me like all the way through, and it got me out of college and graduated, and it's still like No Greater Sacrifice still walks with me, and Rebecca still walks with me. And so yeah. And Rebecca was always very clear about that. She was always very clear about how she really like didn't just want to be somebody who like footed the bill, unless you like to swim and figure college out on your own. So No Greater Sacrifice like really stepped into life with me, and I know life with all of their students. And I think again, with the upbringing and the whirl of it all, that like was such a huge gift.
Yeah, I think No Greater Sacrifice just takes, their mission, and then they exceed their mission. They go above and beyond. They if you have a problem that's even outside of school related, like they are there for you. They're
absolutely,
just a phone call away, like Rebecca, Kelly, Cannon, like all of them are just, a phone call away, and they're just so amazing.
They really are. They really are. So blessed to have them as family and to be a part of the No Greater Sacrifice family.
Yes, because once you're accepted in as a scholar, you and your entire family become a part of the No Greater Sacrifice family.
Absolutely. It's so cool. Yes.
Yes. So my final question is, what advice would you give to another military child?
That's a really good one. I think that something that I've gotten to reflect on recently, I've been moving recently, and I was going on a trip right after I moved, like the same day. And it was so sweet because I was like, wow, what a gift to be able to cross state lines after a move, like I had all the times as a child before. And it just brought me back to that. And so I think that in reflecting on all of that kind of recently, and just thinking about life as a whole, I think for a military child, I would just say like appreciate like where you are, the moments that are happening around you, the moments that you're creating, and you don't know what's around the bend. So just like live fully in that moment. And it's okay not to know what's around the bend. And it's okay to just be present. I feel like that was such a challenge for me, was being present, and really like accepting and receiving like all that life had in that moment. And so my advice to a military child would just be to start now, to start just being present and living in the moment and taking life for all that it is, because it's a really beautiful thing. And when you start to live presently, like I've gotten to recently, it's just, I mean, it really changes the game. Like you're just more full, and it always prepares you like for what's around the bend. So my final piece of advice would just be to be present.
Yes, that is wonderful. And I think, in all the situations that you've been through, like from remembering the day your dad joined to, now, and I think it's a journey all through and through. And if you miss those moments, you're going to miss those moments because you only get like one blink and then it's gone. So it's really important to be present in it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for being on and sharing your story and your journey that you've been on, and all the best to you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Gracie, and you too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all for listening to this week's episode of Grace of a Military Child podcast. If you enjoyed listening, don't forget to follow, like, share, subscribe, review, and comment. You can also follow us at Grace of a Military Child podcast on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram for more podcast-related content. If you or someone you know is a military child who would like to be featured on the podcast, please send us a message to one of our social media platforms or send us an email to grace.of.a.military.child@gmail.com. For more information on No Greater Sacrifice, you can go to nogreatersacrifice.org or send an email to info@nogreatersacrifice.org. Thank you, and join us back next week for another inspiring story.